Morning.
Good morning.
There you go. Bit of a run to the line.
A little bit, but it's been that kind of week.
It's been chaotic, hasn't it? Karen's just in the middle of not finalising, in the middle of a really large enterprise agreement negotiating.
Two, actually.
Two?
Did you forget?
Yeah. So no.
I just realised my hair's really flat. Oh, but this isn't.
Don't start talking about hair. Okay. It's the same with my hands. It's very flat.
I'm sorry.
So no, interesting week. We haven't had anything from Parliament to disturb the calm within the industrial world. More promises, but no delivery in the IR package.
Yeah.
So.
But a bit around the whole Australia Post and Christine Holgate piece, though.
Yeah, isn't that a dumb thing? Imagine a person. We're talking. She spent $15,000 in bonuses in our organisation, and in a year we spend $200,000 in bonus. We don't call them watches. But they could be a watch, couldn't they? And some of those are discretionary. You know, if a big deal's brought through, we do something. Yeah, I can't find a good explanation to what occurred with her. But that's when you're connected to Parliament, you're poisoned by Parliament. Does that make sense? You know, if you're partly owned by the Australian government, the politics of the Australian government, whatever government is in at that particular time, are going to afflict the way in which you practice them. The answer for me is don't work in anything that's connected to government, because that's just too awful, isn't it? Because you want to be good at your job and you should be measured by your job. The other thing is we're seeing a bit of a bounce in the economy. We're certainly seeing it now. I think the pre-JobKeeper figures came out which showed reductions in the unemployment figure. I noticed nobody put out that there's still been an increase in people wanting employment. So the figures only measure people unemployed. They don't measure what people are looking for work or underemployed, and that rate is still incredibly high in Australia.
Yeah. But
the next set of figures, of course, will come out post-JobKeeper. But I think there'll be a bit of a blip, but what I am seeing is there's been a restructure of our economy, and we're starting to see people working locally and very productively, and our clients are busy. Now that's time.
It is.
We're off and running.
All right. So welcome to the Friday Workplace Briefing. We're nearing the 50th.
How many to go till we're 50?
I should know.
We should know. Sophie, can you tell us? Can you send us a message to tell us?
Is that the 7th of May or something?
I think it is.
Yeah.
So we're very close. So that's very exciting. We've got a special panel lined up for that of people who are highly skilled in dealing with the types of disruption we're dealing. Some had personal experience in it, and they're going to come along and talk to you about how they manage. I think so. Send us a message there.
3 more.
3 more to go. Thanks, Soph. So I think that's going to be fantastic. But let's not talk about that because we've got a pretty full agenda.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
I think today the things I want to talk about is there's 3 cases that have come through which I think tell us a lot about where we are in our workplaces, particularly around dealing with health-related issue and behavioural issues. Dring was a case that we brought to you probably about 6 months ago. And that was a case of a woman who, with another woman, came down to Melbourne for Telstra. They went out, they drank 2 bottles of wine, they had a bit of a dance, they clearly smashed, they came home at 2:30 in the morning, and one of the women fell over and injured themselves and put in a workers' comp claim. Now there's 2 Hazimotus and another case, which was, you all know, is the case of the person who had sex in the hotel and hit her head on a light case, which ultimately failed. I've always said there's 2, but sorry. Well, it's, I can give you the citations, but it's just initials. Okay.
Everyone giggles every time you mention that case, but anyway.
Anyway, she was not compensated. I think that's the important thing to remember.
Yeah.
So the first thing about workers' compensation, it relates to a workplace. And what Hazimotus and that case say is, well, yes, it's connected to a workplace. So they're in a hotel, which is where work's being carried on, but it must have some connection to the work that is being undertaken at the workplace. And as a result, in Dring's case, the full federal court agreed with what the article we wrote last time, and the federal court saying, quite properly so, if you went out and had no drinks but came over and fell over an hour later, that would be connected to your workplace because there wasn't an intervening event that changed the circumstances around it. But Karen, I think this really throws out to all of us because we're constantly working outside of work, and more than ever now, post-COVID, I say post-COVID with touching wood, people are going to continue to work from home. They're going to work from all sorts of locations, and the importance around risk assessment, policy, and clarity around what is work and what is not work. So maybe you can talk to that a bit.
Yeah, Yeah, so really with this, the question is, well, how do we currently define what is work and what isn't work? And, I take you back to policies in terms of what policies we have in place to help to provide that guidance and direction. So I think that's the key point here, isn't it, Andrew, in terms of being able to rely on a set of rules, some guiding principles around on how to manage that.
Including when you're sending some people on retreat, to be absolutely clear about what is the behaviour that's expected while you're working, what is not work, but also to be honest and say, look, although this is not work, we have a reasonable expectation of behaviour. And that's a whole series of Qantas cases of people who've got drunk outside of their flight time and injured themselves. And Qantas are very clear in saying, no, we put you up at a hotel. You can stay at that hotel, but the expectations of our behaviour around you because you represent Qantas are these, and if you breach those and injure yourself, it will not be compensable. And repeatedly, Qantas have won those cases on workers' compensation. And funnily enough, we keep growing in size, and we're sort of doubling in size every 6 months or so, which has been a bit daunting for us. But as we're having our morning breakfast together discussing what we're going to talk about today, Karen goes, yeah, we don't have that policy. So we'll, in time, if you're interested, we can provide you, because we are building that policy.
Yes.
If you're interested,
it's in development.
It's in development. Just let us know if you do one, and we'll obviously provide templates like we do on all occasions.
Yes.
Next case, I think, is Cremasco. I know it's Cremasco, is one of those fascinating cases in workers' compensation land that Kim brought to my attention the other day, which is when you've got somebody who has an underlying physical condition, you can't see that condition. Okay, you don't see it. And now remember, in law, that's called an eggshell skull. You take people as they are, and you don't know whether their skull's this thick or it's this skull. If you belt them on the head, and it wouldn't break a normal person's brain, but it breaks theirs, you're liable. Okay, so that's the legal concept that sits behind it. This was a guy who had hypertension, unstable hypertension. He was treated poorly over a protracted period of time by the employer, and as a result of that, he ended up having an aortic aneurysm, which, as most of you know, is not normally pretty fatal. It wasn't in this case. He brought a workers' compensation claim saying that the anxiety and the stress that he was suffering at work caused or contributed to what was a workplace injury. And what the court said is, look, you've got to look at the longevity of employment. What were the circumstances that caused effect over that longevity of employment? Because, it could be that it's something outside of work that's causing that stress. So it's actually not an easy thing. But if you can then show that the behaviour that was occurring in work was causative, and he had a specialist who said unquestionably it was, and the objective evidence was the manner in which he was being treated was poor over a substantial period of time, then it will be compensable. Now, the lessons just jump off the page in that, don't they? Because a person with really substantial hypertension, it is visible. A person who's been treated poorly, it's visible. All of these things could have been dealt with because he'd be exhibiting a whole range of behaviours prior to a stage where his hypertension was so out of control. And remember our obligations of monitoring health. We can't walk away from this. We've got to do everything that's reasonably practical, identify the hazard, determine the risk, institute a control with the resource of the organisation in monitoring someone's health to prevent injury. Yet in this circumstance, so this is a safety breach as well. This is why it's a lay down misere for workers' compensation.
Yep.
In a safety breach world, what were the supervisors doing for a man who is clearly unwell? And why were they behaving in a manner which precipitated something which is life-threatening? And I keep, it's a joke that we sort of half make. I mean, someone walked into the room and punched you in the heart, you'd then sack him overnight. You'd go, get out of here. Don't go punching people. But somebody can actually provoke and prompt and prod someone to a stage which has exactly the same outcome. And yet they avoid the consequences of their behaviour.
It's an interesting one, Andrew, because I think for so long, it's considered, so many people look at it as being a private matter. You've got, your own personal medical conditions and you've got stuff going on in your life. I don't want to pry, is it work-related, it's not work-related. So then you kind of you just pretend not to know anything, and therefore you avoid having to manage it. Now, the way that we're working, the way that this is the permanent way we're going to be working. It's going to be this hybrid model, right? You can no longer, I guess, look at it that way. It's like you actually, if it's affecting you in your life and it's affecting you in your work, it is work-related.
And the answer is it always was. It just now the level of volatility and risk that sits around is so much higher. The engagement risk is so much higher. The safety law has always been the same, the obligation to monitor. Privacy law has always said your health condition, insofar as it can be affected by work or affects your capacity to work, is not caught by privacy law. So when you look at the laws lining up, discrimination law says it's lawful to treat someone differently as a result of their attribute if it is to protect their life and their capacity to undertake the inherent requirements of their job. So discrimination law doesn't say it's unlawful. Employment law says, yes, you've got to be fit for the inherent requirements of the job, and if you're not, I need to inquire why, and I need to take action in accordance. And as we'll see later with Grant and DPP is a case, when you're sitting across managing someone with a health-related issue, which you ought to have picked up. Remember Burke and Suncorp we talked last week, you ought to have picked it up. If a reasonable person could observe that Karen was struggling in some way, physically or mentally, I must act and intervene.
Yeah, and physical and mental, they're the same.
They're exactly the same. It's just illness or injury. So anyway, look, a really interesting case. And of course, the guy won compensation out of it. And the last case is just a little gem, which Karen and I want to remind you because we live in the industrial space every day. And that is the CFMEU, an Australian Building Construction Commission, which now has gone to the High Court and ruled that a union official who enters a site ostensibly, I say ostensibly, on a safety basis, must be carrying and present and show their federal union permit to enter the site. Now, you're an ex-union official, Karen. You're actually a safety official.
I used to have those permits and an REO permit, if you remember one of those things. So it was safety too. So yes, they do exist, and we should have them. I always really ask for them, but it doesn't mean that as employees that look, don't apologise or feel as though you shouldn't ask. You're perfectly entitled to ask, and you should ask, and understanding what a valid permit looks like as well.
All right. Well, look, let's go on to the next part of it, which is talking about mental health. Today is really the end of our mental health discussions, and it's also the end of the bit of paper which has my case law on it. So I will, I'll make it up from here. Soph, what have you done to me? You shuffled it.
I think Soph's going to load up a slide for me.
She can't load up a slide. I've got to do my bit. Soph, give me a break. Well, you'll notice that is a profile of me with a nose reduced. That head.
Well, I didn't expect you to draw that conclusion so quickly, but it's very accurate.
It is very accurate, isn't it? Well, let me talk about the case.
All right, fine.
Because Soph's tried to cut me out by not giving the slide.
All right, okay.
But let's talk very, very simply about what the law is. We said
it's a blueprint.
I know it's a blueprint. We talked last week about Burke and Suncorp and Kubat's cases, which talked about the obligation when a reasonable person could identify a health-related issue to respond. The difference between Burke and Suncorp was Burke and Kubat was very simple. In Burke was a young man. His physical hygiene started to deteriorate. He isolated dramatically. He was a shocking attender at work. He was looking vulnerable. He was crying in tea rooms. And the court just said at the end, look, any reasonable person seeing this man must have observed there was some health-related issue. In Kubat, this was a woman who had a pretty ordinary job because she was a translator in a hospital. And you're not often translating great news in a hospital. She was absent from work quite a lot. She had looked sad on occasions and cried during a performance management meeting. She subsequently put in a workers' comp claim. But the issue about her was, would any reasonable person have observed she had a health-related issue? And what the court said is, look, a reasonable person is not a clinician. A reasonable person is you or me. And there's nothing, the fact that she attended work irregularly, the fact that she looked sad on a couple of occasions is not enough to say that she stands out from any other employee. It must be genuinely showing something, like we talked about Cremesco's case, flushed face, pinpoint pupils, breathlessness. Someone that attends like that, you start going, no, there really is something going on. So that's the case law that sits behind the proposition that a person doesn't have to tell you they've got a health-related issue if you as a reasonable person, not as a clinician, could see there is a change in that person's capacity and it starts to affect their capacity to undertake work. Thank you. I think that might have been an email to me saying I've just cut your nose off on the slide. From that came a case called Grant and DPP, which is an enormously important case because what that said is, once you've made that observation, or you are obliged to make that observation, so you either do or you're obliged, you then must undertake an assessment of what can the person continue to do in the job they're doing, and they must be managed against that. In respect of what they can't do, bring in discrimination law and also workers' compensation law. You'll see why workers' compensation law in a second. You must assess what they can't do and what are the adjustments that need to be made to do it. Now, if you don't do that, obviously you've not managed the person, you don't have business, you don't have the third defence in a stress-related claim because you didn't take reasonable action in managing the person's performance. But what the judge said in that case is that's actually a plan. That's not you just looking at someone. You actually have a plan and then you supervise that plan with the person to continue the obligation of monitoring health, which is really bringing us to what we promised to talk about today, which is, well, how do you build a mental health plan? And that's as an organisation. So that's the, when we look at that, then we go down to the micro level. Can I descend this macro level plan down to an individual? And the answer is absolutely yes. But the first thing as an organisation has to do in reasonable practicability is, after it's identified health as a risk, as a hazard, it knows it's a high level risk because of the frequency of it and the nature of what occurs. It has to create controls within the workplace, which is building supervisor skill, building capability to actually manage and monitor. But most importantly, it must allocate a resource. And resource is not just money, it's infrastructure within an organisation that allows you to manage.
Yeah, so it's infrastructure, it's people, it's actually skills and experience. So, yeah.
Okay, and realising those controls, they're not engineering controls. They're not, we're not getting rid of the problem. What we're doing is, at an administrative level, building a capability within the organisation. And when you've got a high level risk like mental health, and all you can do is administrative, that means the level of supervision required, because as you go down the hierarchy of control, the level of supervision exponentially increases. The level of supervision must increase dramatically, which means the skill base must increase dramatically. Karen, over to you. And my face, without a nose.
Well, in summarising what Andrew just said, I know thank you for the feedback around the infographics that we've been providing. So, and I know many of you love just trying to keep something visual and keeping it very in simple steps. So what we've done here is just broken up what Andrew's just talked about, that whole framework across 6 steps for you. So the importance of needing to plan, obviously having a clear process around what is it that your plan is going to involve. We already talked about accountabilities in terms of investment and resources. The training part is a critical part of it. And we're not just talking about just training, meaning training in terms of achieving competency, and that involves an assessment with that. Supervision, which is an ongoing thing, okay? And monitoring, which is something that is so often we know of but doesn't get done well, because through like continuous monitoring, that's where you pick up where things aren't working, but also your opportunities for improvement. And from that, going, looping back to square one, is around how do we measure against the plan that we set originally as well. So just like a little simple blueprint for you. Hopefully that's useful to you, but look, we are getting some queries in this space around a bit more practical guidance and help around mental health. So I want to see if I can get this thing working over the next couple of days and focus on building a template or a tool for you. So.
And look, I think what we've talked about there and what Karen's put for you is actually what a safety system is. They're the 6 elements of it. I put it like that. They are the 6 elements of a safety system. If you do those things, the most important thing is you never quite know what the problem is. Okay. So if you look at Snowden and Boone, who talk about management theory and leadership theory, one of the things they say is there's 4 key styles of decision making. There's urgent decision making, floods coming down, you've got to move. Highly directive leadership. Karen, get out of here and stand up somewhere high. You can't brook any dissent. It has to be done. There's decisions where we know what the problem is and we know what the solution is, and we spreadsheet that sort of stuff. We build a process and we manage it. There's things where we know what a problem is, but we don't quite know the solution is, and you say, oh, look, I need Karen for that help. And as a leader, to pretend you know the answer is very destructive to those who are beneath you, because you don't and you sound like a bum. So it's knowing when to reach out in those leadership. And finally, there's where we live our life around mental health, where we don't know what the problem is and we don't know what the solution is. And the people who come and sell you, first aid toolkits. It's just a nonsense. Okay, the answer is with mental health, you don't know who's got mental health issues. You don't know what the mental health issues are, so you don't know what the problem is, and you don't know what's causing it, and you certainly don't know what the solution is.
Yeah.
And what Snowden and Boone said is the key to that is to say, look, start with a working hypothesis. Do some research, find out what you can find out, and you'll find never enough evidence of this type of thing to be clear, but start with a working hypothesis.
Yep. Keep
consulting and engaging and work on that hypothesis and sharpen and sharpen and sharpen. And in that way, you have a great outcome because it is evidence-based. It draws people into the decision making, and it doesn't make you the guide who answers everything. What it does is it shows respect to the intellect and capabilities of the people around you and the vulnerabilities that are around you, and allows you to develop a racing car that goes faster than any other racing car because it's the best racing car for the people you've got. But when you go and work in another place, you're not going to be able to take that racing car and go quickly. The last comment about Snowden and Boone is making no decision is the worst of all, I might say. So that's their theory. But remember, in leadership theory, if you come back to this planning process that we talk about systems, it means please go to the evidence, don't make stuff up.
Well, the great thing about having, this is really a framework, right? Okay, so the great thing about having a framework in place there is that it prompts you to ask the right questions in any given circumstance, depending on what the issue, it doesn't matter what it is you're dealing with, it's going to prompt you to ask the right questions.
And so, just look at the board reports that I prepare. They always ask the same first question is, what is the problem I'm trying to solve or the benefit I'm seeking to obtain? What is the issues that arise from that? What is the evidence behind those issues? What are the questions I should ask? What are the risks that attend it? What is the resolution I should take? That structure in a board report, which is common good governance, is the same in the way we should do everything.
Absolutely.
Anyway, let's move on. We're problem solving and we've got too many questions in my problem today. But it is a fascinating problem. Let's go so. David is a sales manager. He's a large man. He has a history of heart-related issues. He has recently separated from his wife of 22 years. His supervisor, Gwen, has asked him if he needs support and offered EAP, which David declined. Since then, his co-workers have noticed his breathing is shorter and strained, particularly around Gwen. Gwen is a severe woman, has had bullying complaints made against her before. She's on a second warning in respect of that behaviour. At the beginning of April 2021, David is struggling with his work. Gwen keeps putting pressure on him to complete the job correctly and counsels him on his errors. She says things in front of others like, how could you think that is right? Why isn't this ready on time? And David, what is wrong with you? You're better than this. His face becomes more red. He is breathless and glassy-eyed. His work comrades and Gwen's supervisor, Jenny, all see David are concerned about his deteriorating health and work performance. Jenny has seen the way Gwen treats David. Although Jenny is unhappy with it, she has taken no action. Gwen finds David asleep in a chair behind his desk. Very common thing with hypertension, and particularly if people are larger and have sleep apnea, they'll have these short sleeps. She wakes him and says he's not fit for work and sends him home. She scolds him. They will meet tomorrow for a disciplinary meeting. David becomes agitated. He shouts, then falls to the floor. Paramedics arrive and he's taken to hospital. He has had a stroke because of the extraordinary high blood pressure he was at the time. So that's our problem. Now, there is a lot of questions today. We're going to give you extra time. I've been warned by Sophie. So there you go. Look at the length of one of those questions. So off you go.
Stretching time. Yeah.
I think people are doing remarkably quickly here.
Well,
we might give 30 more seconds and then...
Yeah, it's quite layered though, so people are thinking. I think it's coming through. Yeah. Let's see. Most people have come through now, so perhaps another 10.
Okay.
All right. Let's go.
All right. 5, 4, 3,
You're doing a different
2,
count.
1.
Okay.
Time.
All
Okay,
right,
the
let's
bell has
go.
rung.
Okay, that's it. Let's go.
And
Yeah.
can you
I
just
will,
move that
I will.
aside so that I can actually see the question? Okay.
Can you do that?
Yeah, I can see it. Okay, take it down there because I can see the responses. I just want to read the questions. All right. Question 1, did David's business have an obligation to satisfy himself he was fit for the inherent requirements before the incident? And you overwhelmingly say yes, and you are overwhelmingly right, both in the safety obligation around monitor health and in the employment law and discrimination space, which are the 3 cases that I've talked to you about. So well done, guys. I thought that was a bit of a trick, but nobody got tricked. Next one is just long, but it's a good one. Did Gwen have an obligation to satisfy herself of David's medical condition before sending him home under threat of disciplinary action, knowing he has never slept on the job or had any performance issues for 17 years of his employment until he worked with Gwen? And the answer is absolutely yes. She definitely did. Obviously, Gwen wasn't too not the most empathetic soul, Gwen, and missed it a little bit. So on the facts we have, I'd say on the balance of probability, being a lawyer, she should have done it. So there's an argument she shouldn't, but I think she was. Was Gwen bullying David? Okay, now, really interesting question, and this is a legal question, not the Herald Sun method of bullying. So was there repetitive action? Yes, there was repetitive action. Was it unreasonable? In that, would an objective person say that it was that it could hurt, humiliate, or intimidate the person involved? It's close. So there's a Westpac case that says if you're working in a group of people doing functions that you share and you raise with the person in front of others where they should be, there's a very close margin as to whether that's unreasonable behaviour. In a sales-based environment, it may not be unreasonable. In an environment where a person is a clerk or an office worker, where it's not part of a team-based function, I'm probably say it's unreasonable. And the last test is, did it create a safety risk for the person in their environment? And I think in this case it did. So on the balance, I'd say it probably is bullying. But when someone says bullying to you, I just want to remind you, I guess, that it's a form of misconduct. Misconduct is a continuum. Bullying, discrimination, sexual harassment, up here, down here, being rude, shouting, being nasty, back here, failing to comply with being told to do things reasonably, being sullen, surly. It's a continuum. So don't get caught on the word bullying, just like don't get caught on the word discrimination. It's just misconduct. And it's the gravity of that misconduct that we look at as to how we manage them. Could you just see if you pick up what Matt said there? I can't see it.
Wouldn't the comments like "you're better than this" lean more towards the bullying aspect over
Absolutely.
the noting?
Yeah, so 2 parts of it. One is disparagement always is unreasonable. And disparaging in front of people is unreasonable. And that's why I'm saying I think you're right, Matt. I think it definitely is unreasonable. The only difficulty is if the work environment is commonly full of sort of disparaging jokes, and that's part of what the workplace is.
Yeah.
So we run the risk of that. We crack jokes at each other's expense far too often. But that's you and me more, actually. If it's part of a common way of dealing with each other, and it's part
if you
of,
normalise that type of behaviour, and it's part of your culture and how you work, then.
And I think we don't do that. I've just made that up because Karen's a bit tired today, and I thought I'd get a jab in early. But the issue is that's why you mustn't do it. Why you mustn't allow it, because you don't know the vulnerability of people. A respectful environment doesn't have jokes that hurt people. Would David succeed in the common law action against the business and Gwen? Now, I put that in because unquestionably against Gwen, and because the business has a non-delegable duty, they are liable. So to understand in negligence terms, an employer always has a non-delegable duty in respect of its employees' behaviour in common law liability, and not everyone understands that. So when Gwen behaves badly, the organisation behaves badly. So yeah, there is no doubt at all. So the test there, is it a reasonably foreseeable consequence? And the answer is yes, it is. Okay, it's a known consequence that if you push someone's anxiety up and they have blood pressure, they could have a heart attack or have some heart-related issue. So once you've got a duty of care, an employer has a well-known duty of care, which is very high. That means it's easy to breach. it is a non-delegable duty of care. So the only question you have then is there damage? Well, yes, there is damage. And is that damage reasonably foreseeable? So duty, reasonable foreseeability, damage, 3 elements of negligence, you got it. Now just imagine this case, because it's definitely compensable. We've talked about Camasco's case before. This is definitely compensable. So on the day-to-day, premium goes through the roof to start with, okay? But the common law claim, if it gets in Victoria within 3 years, starts to keep premium very high. In the other states where they have common law claims, you've got 5-year premium sort of periods. So you're definitely going into your premium. So for a business with $10 million REM, for instance, this claim has now a $750,000 claim, and it's going to be sustained. So it's going to cap out your premium every single year going forward to 3 to 5 years. So in somewhere like Queensland, if this claim came through, it could be $1.5 million on your premium. All because somebody treated someone poorly on occasions and could have done better. The last part is, will the employer and Gwen be liable under safety law? Well, Gwen has an obligation in Victoria under Section 25, which is mirrored throughout Australia, to exercise reasonable care, competent person doing their job, to not injure themselves or others. So Gwen would be liable. She wouldn't be prosecuted because none of the regulators are focusing to that extent on bullying at the moment. Can I just say to you, Safe Work Australia are now building a lot of focus around mental health and bullying. And if the next government were to be a Labor government federally, that push to continue the harmonisation of legislation and place safety where bullying where it properly belongs, which is inside safety law, not in the Fair Work Act, then it would happen. And yes, once again, because of the duty that exists there, which is to provide a safe working environment and a safe system, and we've already talked about what a system is, it's not there. So, but at the moment, unlikely to be prosecuted. 3 to 5 years' time, because the focus on mental health, I think it definitely will be prosecuted. So look, that's us for today. That's done it. Now next week, what I want to talk to you about is around governance in human resources and safety, because it is the most emergent issue and people are not doing it well. So Karen and I will talk about that during the week. We're both a bit scattered and all over the place. But I want to bring, over the next 2 weeks, some knowledge of what it is and then the structure of how to do it for the next 2 weeks. Until then, guys, see you later.
Care. Have a great long weekend for me. I'm spending time with the kids on Monday.
Oh, you lucky thing. Well, good.
All right.
Deserve it.
See you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.